So right now, it is my joy to give you a very, very wonderful introduction, and some of you all may already know this sweet man. Please come on up, Anil. This, I want to make sure I say his name correctly, Anil Sinha. He is already a very important part of Pyramid Valley and the Meditation Lab. Let's give him a very warm welcome.
A very good morning, all our friends. After 4 days of bathing and immersing in the joys of meditation and experiencing the altered states of reality, which I'm sure you all have gone through, we thought it's only appropriate that before this whole effect wears off and you are back to your normal day-to-day world, we give you a glimpse of, is there a science behind all this? So, of course, we keep hearing all the time about this connection between science and spirituality. This awareness is growing slowly, and many people are becoming aware of it. In fact, at Pyramid Spiritual Society's movement, as you would have observed, Patriji calls everyone as a spiritual scientist. So spiritual science is truly the new science, and giving it validity in the terms of what the scientific world understands as science is this very beautiful domain of quantum physics. Quantum physics has been one of the most important branches of science which has developed in the past 50, 60 years, more so especially after 1980s, when it has slowly started making inroads into helping us understand the entire spiritual experience domain as pure science. And one of the gentlemen who has been at the forefront of this movement is none other than Dr. Amit Goswami. He's a quantum physicist who has, of course, as the name suggests, he is Indian origin. He is from Bengal, from Kolkata, but he went to United States of America somewhere in the 1960s, and he has been there since then. And he has, of course, like he was a full professor at the University of Oregon in the Department of Physics, from where he retired sometimes around mid-1990s. And then after that, he has moved tremendously in this direction of helping us apply quantum physics to understand how the true nature of reality happens, how consciousness works. And some of his path-breaking discoveries have been that consciousness is the ground of all being, and he talks the language of science. We talk about spirituality and we intuitively feel that it is all deep science, but having a scientist speak about it is so much more confidence generating. So Dr. Amit Goswami, as some of you might be aware, has been talking about understanding of consciousness from a quantum physics perspective. For a long, long time, he is an author of many very well-received books. And of course, many of you know, you must have seen the documentary called What the Bleep Do We Know?, which came sometime in 2004 or 2005. And that is when the world first noticed Dr. Amit Goswami talking about consciousness from a quantum physics perspective. And then, of course, he started this whole movement called the quantum activism movement. And I'll tell you a little bit about that. And this quantum activism movement, through that, he has been trying to help us understand how we can create a better world and a better life for all of us and for others if we understand the true nature of reality using the science of quantum physics. So, quantum physics gave a very interesting understanding, a new way of looking at things. And as you can see here, that he says that, the basic shift that came was in terms of our understanding that instead of a causal continuity of events, which we perceive the world as, which sometimes makes us feel like victims and helpless because we just have to live the life some others have created for us. He said that how beautiful things will be if we understand that every time we observe, there's a new beginning. And this is such a profound thought that if we understand and imbibe it, we are ever optimistic. Nothing can stop us from becoming better than what we were a moment ago. And that's what all the spiritual sciences are also telling us. So he started this movement called quantum activism, which, as you can see, he has talked about this idea of transforming society through self-transformation. And what an interesting synchronicity it is that he is here to talk to you about his ideas on the birthday of this great person, Mahatma Gandhi, who he quotes very often, because he truly inspired this idea of quantum activism by saying, be the change that you want to see. So on the birthday celebration of Mahatma Gandhi, it's very appropriate that Dr. Amit Goswami is here to talk to you about his idea of quantum activism. And he has been, of course, conducting a lot of workshops, and he has been the author of many books. In fact, the fields of life where he has applied his ideas very profoundly are the world of medicine, the world of business and economics, and he is now creating a new concept of a transformational education for all leaders from any domain, be it medicine, be it business, be it other areas of society, because he says that we need a new breed of leaders for the society to change. And these leaders will transform the society by first transforming themselves. And to do this, he has just recently launched this Quantum Activism Vishwalayam, a new project which will become in period of time as a full-fledged transformational university. And it will be teaching quantum activism-based course, which has been just recently launched, called Quantum Science and Conscious Leadership. So the entire emphasis on leadership, and this program has already been launched from the beginning of this month in India. It was his dream that this project, which has been in his mind for more than 2 decades, it was his dream that it happens in India. And why India? Not just because he happens to be an Indian origin, but through his tremendous study of this field of quantum physics and trying to understand the true nature of reality and consciousness, he came to this understanding that it was all there. All this knowledge was always there, and it is still there in our DNA in India. India is the place where it all began, and to be fair, it is not just about India, but it's about a period of time of human civilization when the ancient knowledge systems existed. And India, of course, has been at the forefront of that. So today, friends, he's here to talk to you about connecting the ancient wisdom with quantum physics. So let's give him a big hand, and let's hear from Dr. Amit Goswami that what he wants to share us about this whole connection between quantum physics and the ancient wisdom, which has inspired him for all his work. Dr. Goswami, thank you.
Thanks, Anil. I'm still a little wobbly because of this flu that I had about 4 or 5 days ago. Now it's all gone, but still. So forgive me if I wobble sometimes. Thanks to everyone who were instrumental in inviting me, Srinivas Bhattiji and all the other dignitaries. It is simply wonderful to talk about these two events in history of knowledge. What happened in ancient India 5,000 years ago, and what happened in the 20th century over a period of something like 60, 70 years of the 20th century. It's simply amazing how difficult it is to talk about something that we are. In fact, if you ask yourself, what is consciousness? If you are not a bit surprised that it is not easy to answer that, then I think something is a little bit wrong in the way you think about things. Many people don't think nothing of it. To them, consciousness is just a phenomenon. And if you think like that, you're hopeless. You really are hopeless. Because something is fundamentally going to screw you up in your ventures in life and put you astray. Because if you don't know who you are, then how can you serve yourself? The realization that, yes, I want to know who I am, and therefore I want to have some goal and meaning into the way that I live my life, that realization is the beginning of spirituality in us. Are we born as spiritual beings? This is debatable. Depends on what you mean by that. Do we have the potentiality of being spiritual? Yes. But let me start with the discovery 5,000 years ago. What actually happened? People thought about phenomena themselves and found that some phenomena are very difficult to understand, others are easy. The easy stuff is called objects of the world. The difficult stuff is the one that is cognizing the object. And initially they thought they have nothing to do with the cognizer. Surprisingly, the idea that I cognize, therefore I am something, that idea did not come to people immediately. So the initial models of consciousness that we find are all what is called dualism. Consciousness, God, or what have you, not one entity initially, lot of entities, gods, goddesses, many gods, many goddesses, and then we have also objects of the world, of which we are also part. This is the situation the sages that we call sages of the Upanishad found themselves 5,000 years ago. They must have lived a community. They must have been what we would call research community today. They probably had a pretty comfortable research grant from some king or something. And they knew a lot of techniques that had developed in their community. Today we call these techniques meditative techniques, but I think we make a slight mistake already. I think they were using techniques that we should call techniques of creativity, creative process. The result of this was amazing. One after the other, these sages who did not even put their name to any particular, absolutely amazing statements they made about the world, about reality. Simply amazing how it could have come about, which even today surprises. Even today surprises. Even today we don't quite understand it. Even with the ideas of quantum physics, as you will see, you will hesitate to understand the message immediately. This is why scientists, even of the alternative milieu, cannot agree with each other about what consciousness is, how to research consciousness, how to even define consciousness, or what is the basics of consciousness. These people declare things like everything is consciousness. Everything is consciousness. This is the first statement anywhere in the world that was ever made pronouncing the unity of everything. All things are one. How can that be when separateness is the way we experience each other? How can that be? Were they privy to some deep truth? Today we call this a creative insight, this kind of surprise but very poignant words of wisdom. Reality is oneness. Everything is consciousness. Everything is made of consciousness, however many ways you want to put it. And then they explained it too. This is a bit too obscure. What is the practical aspects of this consciousness? They said, use Sanskrit words, sat, which means existence, chit, which means conscious awareness, the ability of being in a polarity of subject looking at object. And then ananda, a word which means joy or happiness. But you have to be careful about the word happiness. It is used also in other connotations like pleasure. Ananda is not pleasure. Ananda is about an expansion of consciousness. So in a very clever way, these researchers are saying that there is existence. This is the perpetual state of this being that we call consciousness. And then there is a lived state of this consciousness. That lived state has two polarities: subject, that experiences the object, and then that's the moment-to-moment experience. And then what's the objective of this splitting the one into two? The objective is to experience greater and greater states of ananda. That's the objective of the world. I have not ever found a more clever, profound statement of entire reality in just these three words, Sat Chit Ananda. How intelligent that is. Okay, fast forward a lot. The next big surprise came in the world of science. And out of the blue, again, all great creative discoveries come from out of the blue. Huge surprise. Are people thinking about consciousness in the meantime? Oh, yes, a whole bunch, a whole lot, in different parts of the world. Same kind of discovery was made in various places, but could not be taken much further. Could not be taken much further because the mechanisms of how the oneness breaks up into two, that mechanism is shrouded with mystery. Obviously, our brain has something to do with it, and ancient people had no way of approaching any science or even close to what we call science of the brain. So nobody tried until much later, and initial tries, of course, were very clumsy. No need to dwell on them. But the surprise came around the year 1900 by a scientist named Sigmund Freud, quite a famous name. And he surprised the world by suggesting that our conscious actions, especially if they are neurotic, they come from unconscious. Why is this a surprise? This was a huge surprise because by then, the scientific community was already thinking of reality in terms which is just as different as it can be from that reality that the sages of the Upanishads described. As remote as can be from Satchit, Ananda, or oneness. The idea was prevalent that the world is made of matter, material objects. Matter consists of elementary particles. Energy also consists of elementary particles called quanta. And the idea was that this micro matter makes up macro matter, and of course makes life and rest of the universe. But the origin of everything are these elementary particles of matter and energy. That's it. Moving in space and time. Why is this very different? Because look at the picture. In the picture of the Upanishad, oneness is basic, and then oneness splits up into separateness. Here, separateness is basic, and then separateness gets together, making bigger and bigger objects that you might call conglomerate, but certainly not anything like what the ancient people meant by oneness. And there is one more striking difference, which is that matter moves in space and time. There is no reason to assume there is any other domain of reality than space and time. Nature means space and time, and matter moving in space and time, period. Gone is the ancient concept that there is a oneness domain of reality behind this separate domain of reality where we live, where we have this conscious awareness, subject-object polarity, where we have this human body and brain, where somehow we think that we are conscious and we are aware of other things as if we are conscious. So in this view, to think of consciousness would be like consciousness is an object in the scientific view, I mean, the material view. Consciousness would be consciousness made out of elementary particles. And if you want to be specific, elementary particles make atoms, make molecules, make neurons, neurons make the brain, brain makes consciousness. That's the only way we can conceive of things. How else? How do you rationalize then Freud's work that there is unconscious? Unconscious versus conscious suggests two domains of reality. So the scientists were very hasty, the materialist scientists, very, very hasty to put together a model. They said, well, brain can be unconscious. Unconscious brain action precedes conscious brain action. Then all we have to understand is how is consciousness turned on in the brain. No need to get into all the details. Details did not work according to materialists themselves. This is one good thing about science. You don't get away with shoddy explanations. Others will critique you to death. So consciousness more and more was regarded as an unsolvable kind of thing unless we get completely new surprises. And of course, the new surprise came within some years. Unfortunately, as it often happens, people didn't like it. Although they know repeatedly from history of science that surprises are an essential part of new breakthroughs. The surprising thing was quantum physics. What is it that surprised? Would you mind if I sit? I'm already feeling a little wobbly. So, surprises came in the form of the idea that quantum physics' depiction of objects is radically different from Newtonian depiction of objects. So radical that people really had a hard time understanding and rationalizing what is going on. Some summary of what goes on with objects at the submicroscopic level that we call elementary particles is that these objects are waves. Waves. Now, I know for a non-scientist, this may not be so much of a big pronouncement. See if you can be surprised by this statement. If you can be surprised by this statement, that would be great. That would be very helpful to understand consciousness immediately. Why should this statement be surprising? When we depict an object as a particle and when we depict object as a wave, what's the difference? Let me tell you the difference and see if that surprises you. If you already know, you will miss the surprise, but you already know, that's good. Particles can be only at one place at a given time. One place at a given time. Easy, straightforward to understand. Throw an object, one place at a time, always staying on a trajectory. Imagine the same thing thrown as a wave. What happens? Waves spread, right? Waves spread. What does that mean? That means that waves can be in more than one place at a time. Yeah, spread out. More than one place at a time. Create a water wave, spreads, becoming bigger and bigger crests of water waves, right? So many places at the same time. My sound waves, you are hearing all over the room. So many places at the same time. Convenient too. What is the surprise? We're not saying that objects are particles and waves. No, we are even making more radical statement. We are saying objects are waves. Of course, we then realize, but waves, we don't see objects as waves in space and time. So very soon, people realize that these waves are waves of possibility. But now, another can of worms opened. If they are waves of possibility, then they could not be part of space and time. So one consternation was avoided, that we never see objects spread out. Even electrons and protons and photons, quanta of light, even they don't show up in space and time in more than one place. They always show locally in one place only. So we had to say that the waves must be waves of possibility residing in another domain of reality. See how it was forced upon the physicists? There's no option. Because the mathematics of quantum physics says unequivocally objects are waves. And our observation shows clearly there ain't any waves in space and time. So the waves must be waves of possibility. Where do they reside? Must be in another domain of reality outside of space and time. Many, many physicists, many scientists still cannot come to grips with this jump, this shift, this surprise that quantum physics brings to us from the get-go. If you cannot understand this, if you cannot comprehend this, if you cannot make it part of your world, you are helpless. You cannot understand quantum physics. This is why Nobel laureate physicists, without batting an eyelash, declare, nobody understands quantum physics. As if making it a nobody, instead of saying, I don't understand quantum physics, saying it, nobody understands quantum physics absolves his guilt. It doesn't, you know. Why don't you understand quantum physics? Because you have a prejudice. Prejudice is deep. There is only space and time, and there is only matter. That's the prejudice. So how can there be another domain of reality in which these waves dance and prance and do their thing that then changes phenomena in space and time in such a way that we can create such instruments as transistors and lasers and all this modern technology that you hold in your hand when you're using your cell phone? You have to deal with that. Scientists are like being children, throwing tantrum, refusing to deal with it. How to deal with it? There's only one way of dealing with it. Take it squarely. Objects are waves. They are waves in a domain outside of space and time. Try to define the characteristic of this domain. Now, there were scientists who would do things anyways because they believe in the spirit of science. They are not stymied by their belief system to the extent of stopping all efforts of understanding what is going on. And such people did discover what is the specialty of this domain. And then really, really all hell broke loose. Because what people discovered, that in this domain, everything is at once interconnected. At once. At once. What does that imply? Now here you have to pause a little bit because, to a non-scientist, at once may not have the same impact as it does for a scientist. In space and time, no communication is at once. Impossible. Because all communication must take place with the intermediary of signals like light or sound or objects, particles, and signals have a finite velocity. So no communication is at once, no interaction is at once. Everything takes a little bit of time, telling us that we are separate from each other. Two objects in space and time are separate from each other. But in that domain, by now that domain is called domain of possibility or domain of potentiality, because domain of potentiality, to me anyway, sounds a little more dignified. Does it? I don't know, but maybe it does. Domain of potentiality. It's a nice ring to it anyway. So we recognize that this domain has no separateness, and domain of space and time is the domain of separateness. Gosh, doesn't that language sound very similar to that language of the ancient Indian sages that we began with? Amazing, no? 5,000 years later, some ideas that people struggled, and still struggle, is coming back to haunt us. But this time in science. What's the advantage? I hope you know. In science, we can do experiments to verify things. That's the beauty of it. So if the idea that there is no separateness in this domain, and what does no separateness mean? Gosh, we are so obtuse, scientists are, including myself. We are very scared people. Fear gripped me, using the word unity for the first time, I remembered. Separateness, absence of separateness is unity, my friend. I would not use the word unity in fear that I would offend so many people, they would never read my paper. Then I realized, what the heck? They don't read my paper anyway. So I started the bold pronouncement, absence of separateness must be unity. This is the domain of unity. And I made the connection with science and spirituality. This is the domain that spiritual people call the reality of oneness. Oneness. If there is unity, another way of saying is this is oneness, right? What's so novel about that? But when you put it that way, you are sounding mystical now. But not really, because remember, experimental data will keep you straight. How can one do experimental data? Only one way to verify if there is oneness, which is, if there is oneness, then instant communication is possible. Can one communicate instantly using this domain of potentiality? From 1935 to 1982, quite a few scientists, God bless them, one by one. My heart fills up with this. Experimental physicists mostly, but some theorists as well, who joined in this enterprise. Names like John Bell, you may have heard of, David Bohm, Einstein, Podolsky, Rosen, and then finally Alan Aspect, the one who actually did the experiment. All these people. Final rendition, result. What is it? What is it? Well, of course it's positive. What else can it be? What else can it be? results should have shaken the world. Did nothing of this sort. The world of science by then has become so prejudiced against anything that has the word S in it, spirit in it, spirituality in it. So prejudiced. Immediately it's religion. Don't touch it. It's dogma. Dogma? Quantum physics dogma? How can a mathematical result that Einstein himself wrote in a paper with two of his students, how can that be dogma? Any graduate student can prove, following Einstein, Podolsky and Rosen, this idea that there is oneness. If you correlate two objects, that special word, remember this one, correlate, they become non-local, another special word. Remember this one too, non-local. Separateness, local, communicate with signal, non-local, correlate, and then non-local, communication without signals. And this is what Asprey verified. No signal is needed. Once you correlate two objects, they can move away from each other, however distance they move away, but they still communicate without signal. Experimentally proven. Now any graduate student in a physics lab, provided it's equipped properly, can demonstrate that. But who is watching? Who wants to know? You have to demand to know. Scientists are not interested because this will absolutely break up their whatever they have built. Theory called scientific materialism. Everything is matters. Spirituality is humbug. Spirituality is all but religion, full of dogmas. No, spirituality is not religion. It's not full of dogma. And that's precisely what quantum physics is finding. The big question in this, which I contributed to, was the question of how does the object of potentiality, wave of potentiality, become actuality. And the crucial point I did not even make. It was made by a mathematician who mathematically proved that, look, there is no material means of bringing this transition about. Transition from potentiality to actuality cannot be done with material forces. Von Neumann himself suggested that only way we can get out of this quandary is to suggest that a measurement means the appearance of an observer with conscious awareness. Now, I took this result, made it paradox-free, and made it completely rigorous to understand. It was experimentally verified, and more, I'll come to that. But scientists, many scientists, do not even appreciate how monumentous a finding this is. They think physics should not have anything to say about consciousness. But physics does, because as von Neumann first pointed out, and then I, and then quite a few others, physics does, because without the observer we cannot even define a measurement. What changes, the moment of change between potentiality and actuality. There's only one thing in the universe, and it's not a thing, that can do this and also cognize it. And that's the human observer. That's the human subject. Measurement problem is a very peculiar problem. You start the problem with objects being waves of possibility. You ask the question of how the waves of possibility become particles of actuality, and we end up asking that who is there to know? Unless you have somebody there to cognize this, who is there to know? And unless somebody is there to know, what difference does it make? It will just go back to possibility. How do you know that possibility has become actuality? It has to be a change in knowledge in ourselves, too. Werner Heisenberg, who discovered quantum physics, he was the only one of the original quantum discoverers who thought this way. But nobody noticed his work, nobody noticed von Neumann's work. People did have to notice my work because by then social media was available and I went popular. So I wrote a lot of popular books. And then you came to my support, and gradually the movement grew. So now we have a quantum activism movement which says that if we don't succeed, we'll be activists. We'll change, we'll persuade you by simply developing sheer number of data, new science, new arts, new psychology, new medicine, new economics, everything new. Give up all those Newtonian way of making society a hodgepodge and mess that you have done. Move aside. We'll build a new world on the basis of these ideas that are 5,000 years old. These ideas that resonated with people all through these ages. They say in India that these spiritual traditions have unbroken lineage going all the way to that 5,000-year origin point. Unbroken. This is the only unbroken lineage that ever existed in science, arts, or whatever you have. Thank you. We should all be proud part of humanity to recognize that we are part of that unbroken lineage. And today, we are taking charge. Simply realizing the fact that quantum measurement problem consists of breaking up that unity into two, subject and object. That happens in connection with the brain. That happens in connection with a single cell. That's what makes a cell alive. That's what makes a brain sentient. That's what, by the way, makes our heart go bizarro when we see somebody of romantic interest for me. Remember that Sweet 16 and how it was? Not bad. The heart went a little crazy. That's what is feeling that craziness. Who is feeling it? We don't ask such questions. Oh, it's just there. Gosh, somebody must be feeling it, you know? Just like somebody must be thinking it. The thought is just not there with the brain. Somebody is cognizing it. Somebody is feeling this feeling. And for so many decades, so many centuries, so many millennia, we ignored people who have been telling us that yes, these feelings exist in these places called chakras. Why? Because we cannot comprehend. We cannot comprehend the self in the brain, let alone self in the heart. And today, we can. After all this time, brain scientists have shown that there is a bundle of nerves that exist here, bundle of nerves that exist in the navel. So at least these two places have potent feeling self, just as brain has a potent thinking self. Not only we have one self, but three. And then integrating them becomes another challenge. But these are all fun challenges. These are challenges that we want to be happy doing it, because this is what spiritual work is about. You know how to love someone. You want to love just in your brain? It's no fun. Love with your heart? Yeah, that's juicy. You want to integrate. We want to integrate. Spirituality is about integration. Spirituality is about getting back to that oneness. Now, it is true that there is a lot of barriers to get back to that oneness. So let's go back to the parallels a little more. I have quoted only one Upanishadic dictum, Sarvang Kalidang Brahman, everything is one, Brahman, everything one, consciousness, however you define that one reality, oneness, and it splits, becomes subject and object, and we now can understand how the self arises in the brain, how the self arises in the body. I'm omitting all the details, time doesn't permit me. It's a little bit complex anyway. I mean, why ruin a perfect morning with too much mental intrigue, right? So, but the fun part is that the Upanishads don't end there. The next statement is even more interesting. It says, Aham Brahmasmi. I am Brahman. Do you see the difference, I hope? The first statement was, everything is Brahman. All is Brahman. And now it's saying, I am Brahman. It's a statement about I. So what is the I, knowing which you know that there is unity, and you are that? Right? I am Brahman is coming, making a very personal statement. So this statement makes it clear that the seer knows that our ordinary state of consciousness is not this I. So indeed, in another Upanishad, there is this beautiful image of two birds. One bird sits on a lower branch of a tree. The other bird sits on a higher branch of the same tree. This bird is eating the sweet fruit or bitter fruit sometimes of samsara, and the other bird just looking completely indifferent, but from a height. So this is not low indifference, this is high indifference. I hope you see the difference. No spitefulness. Oneness only. How can it be spiteful? But objective oneness. High indifference. Not interested in the sweet, bitter elements of day-to-day experience. So what it's really saying that, look, there are two selves. Two selves. The ego and a deeper self. When we treat it with quantum physics, this is one of the major accomplishments that quantum physics helps you to do, which is to give you a model for the self in the brain, first of all, how the quantum self, this inner, this higher self arises, which has the key doorway to unity. And then it also shows how the quantum self, through reflection in the mirror of memory that the brain collects as we live through the world, this makes the ego, the reflection in the mirror of memory. Now that sounds familiar to you because you know a little bit of behavioral psychology, I'm sure. And of course, there is agreement, except the mechanisms are very different. Here, the mechanism is purely mathematical, so it's not an empirical theory based on empiricism. It's the theory, so which is good. And it has other consequences. One beautiful consequence of that is that now you can prove that we reincarnate, but that's another story. I won't get into that one. It takes horrendous amount of time to discuss. But what I'm saying is that this idea that the brain can have two self-modalities, this idea should also be verifiable. So the first idea that people verified, neuroscientists, is the idea that is the brain able to non-locally communicate with another brain because it's connected through consciousness. That was done in the 1990s. Repeated since then, some 24 laboratories in different parts of the world. No details because no time. Transferred potential, it's called, transferred potential. Electric potential transferred from one brain to the other without any signal. That's basically what the experiments amount to. So that should be revolutionary enough, but you know, in science we say that let's have all the aspects of the theory checked out. This is a major aspect of the Upanishadic theory. This is also a major aspect of the quantum theory. Both theories are, of course, the same theory, basic theory. Quantum is just putting flesh on the Upanishadic base level theory, giving explanations to some things that people could not explain at that time because they hardly knew anything about the brain. Now we know a lot. I took advantage of that and explained how the self arises. Can neuroscientists come and verify this idea of two selves? To my surprise, they have. This is a real breakthrough. This was done in the first decade of the 21st century. Brain scientists absolutely did a marvelous thing in discovering a new way of studying the brain. Before, they could study the brain only with scalp brain waves. You know, there are brain waves, they put the electrodes on the scalp and then put those electrodes connected with a EEG machine, and the EEG machine measures the scalp brain waves. That was practically our only experimental way of studying a healthy brain. If the brain is epileptic brain, then we could poke around inside the brain a little and there were some data. Or if the brain is a rat brain, and we being human being and superior to animals, at least some scientists think that way, and I agree with some of it, and that too produced some data. But now there's another method, which is called fMRI. MRI, you know, magnetic resonance imaging. We can make images of the brain structure without intruding into the brain. And we can even measure the various parts functioning. Various parts, how they're functioning. That's the fMRI, functional magnetic resonance imaging. We measure not only the structure, brain's various components, but also which components are more active as measured by increased oxygen or blood flow in that organ. So when the brain is in the ego, it's very simple. The brain is active only in a little local area they call self-agency area. Objective sounding, it should be. It is science after all. Self-agency area. Call it the ego. Brain in the ego. And then they found that if you have a creative experience, then the brain acts very differently. Now, the brain acts like all over. Not all over like epileptic attack, not like that, but pretty much all over. Much wider area, like a symphony orchestra playing. And that analogy is really very applicable. Because in a symphony orchestra, what is so marvelous, it amazes, the musician sitting all around the conductor, and conductor just goes, little things he does, and they pick it up and starts playing, maintaining synchrony of the music all the way through. The conductor, of course, is orchestrating the synchrony. Who is orchestrating the symphony in the brain? But that's what we see. We really see these various parts of the brain. Prefrontal cortex, in the middle we have this limbic brain. We have parietal lobe, we have temporal lobe, and all these organs in these various parts. Some of them with beautiful names like anterior cingulate cortex. Nice ring to it. Amygdala, another one. All these different parts. And they're all dancing, all playing music, and all in perfect harmony, in perfect synchrony. How can that be? Who is the orchestra conductor? Quantum self, of course. The inner self, of course. The self that is watching the whole drama completely unattached. That one. That one which is the doorway to oneness. That one which the mystics call spirit. That one which gave us the word spirituality. That one. Knowing which you know that you are one with everything. That one. The brain data has finally proven that we have that oneness built into the brain state. When we are creative, when we are spiritual, when we love, when we are good to one another, then we get this oneness in the brain. And this oneness is ready to resonate with the oneness of everything. How beautiful is that? This is true science. And I tell you, neuroscience is changing the face of materialist science day by day. Some data already of people who meditate a long time. Now, these are really long-term meditators. Put me to shame anyway. Maybe it will put even Patriji in shame, because this guy is like, sorry Patriji, this is like 40,000 hours during their, like maybe 30 years, 40,000 hours of meditation. It's pretty impressive. So what happens? Daniel Goleman and Richard Davidson, an American team, beautiful people, they found in their study that these people, after meditating, and their meditation is also very creative. It's loving-kindness meditation, not just meditating on a mantra or just meditating on awareness, but also studying the archetype of loving-kindness, goodness is another way of putting it, loving-kindness. And what did they find? They found that these brains are now changed. Yeah, the brain just changes. These brains have that all-over activity, that non-local activity, more often than not. It shows up even in their regular chores. In other words, what people say, I don't know if you hear me often enough, but I often say, because I live a little bit of that way, it's called living in flow, where you live with the quantum self. And it's kind of flow. I mean, you do flow. You do flow because your ego is there, it's doing things, but you also flow with the quantum self. You're very aware, as if you're dancing with the oneness, that things are going very smoothly. You don't experience any boundaries. That's why it's called flow. Ordinarily, I end and task begins. So the task becomes a little bit boring after a while. But when there is flow, there is nothing to be bored about because there is no sim, there is no boundary to get us this idea that you are separate and the task is a task. No, you are the task. And this guy's brain shows it. The brain actually shows the same kind of signature. One signature is this synchrony between brain organs all over the brain, and the other signature is also very telling, which is that the brainwave frequency, the scalp brainwave frequency, that jumps from ordinary beta mode, which is when we do a task, jumps to gamma mode, which we get only when we are very concentrated. People used to associate that with mathematical scientists or neurosurgeons, people who need extreme concentration. These mystical people, they're just doing their thing, which is loving. Whatever they do it with loving kindness. What a simple idea. Can I go to the bathroom with loving kindness? Can I eat with loving kindness? Try it. We can talk with loving kindness with each other. That would be something. If we just talk to each other with loving kindness, see the state of the world, how it becomes. And these sages do that all the time. They're like those Upanishadic sages. Their brain must have been similar. Loving kindness, gamma waves of originally only for high concentration and now also for these mystical states. Okay, here is something for Patsuji, right? Gamma wave. It's really nice to have a signature. Nice to have a signature for these things. Nice to have that, okay, you know, you make a claim, I'll take you to the brain scientist and see what we find. And people are not afraid. What is there to be afraid of? Either you find or you don't find. So I made a mistake before, I make a mistake again, but I can again try to be in loving kindness. No shame intended. If you take that spirit, more often than not, loving kindness. How about ordinary people? Can we measure their happiness? Look at how the brain science is changing everything. Brain science is changing everything. I will talk about the third great Mahavakya, as they're called in the Upanishads. The Upanishads don't call them Mahavakya. We call them Mahavakya. They're of the Upanishad. Okay, the third one is even more intriguing. So the first one was Sarvam Kalidang Brahman. Everything is Brahman, everything is consciousness. All is consciousness, rather. And then the second one is I am consciousness, I am that one. And the third one is amazing. Third one says, you are that. Tat tvam asi. Tat tvam asi. You are that. How do I know? I can get into your head, can I? Very strange statement. And if I did, then what would be the signature of it? How do I get to that? How do I make a beginning of that? The quantum self, I was able to show even in my first book. The quantum self is a state where the brain shows goes into a state of tangled hierarchy between its memory apparatus and cognizing apparatus. I'm sure I lost you a little bit, that tangled hierarchy throws you, but truly, we all live, because our society forces simple hierarchies on us. We live in an elitist society virtually everywhere in the world. We talk about democracy, we talk about equality, but in truth, we all have bosses. And this ain't necessary, because that's not how we get the self in the brain. Quantum physics is very clear. You have to have equality, called tangled hierarchy. Two levels of the hierarchy, you and I must contribute to each other in such a way there is complete equality, complete no boundary between us. Can I love you like that? Can I relate to you like that? And what happens when I relate to you like that? So these are questions if we ask, is there a brain signature that we can get from this kind of loving behavior? So these are the questions, these are the kind of questions that we are now bringing to the brain scientists. And brain scientists are coming up pretty well. For example, we now know that there is the area I mentioned called that anterior cingulate cortex. You'll remember the abbreviation, ACC, easy, ACC. And amygdala. Amygdala is the negative emotional brain circuits. ACC is right at the border of the midbrain and the forebrain. And this is where we make positive emotional brain circuits. So my very attempt of loving you in a tangled hierarchical way, is there any other way to love? If I'm hierarchical with you, what is love? What is love? Think about it. How can it be love if I am always directing you, commanding you, or vice versa? Now, if I try to be tangled hierarchical with you, that very fact will produce a certain positivity in the brain, and eventually the brain will make an involvement of neurons that we call a brain circuit. In other words, these neurons will be, as a group, excited. Whenever you and I meet, that's the brain circuit that will be excited because you have a positive identification with each other. We try to be tangled hierarchical with each other, right? So what would be the signature be? Imagine, and this image has been given by brain scientists. I love it. You remember playing seesaw with your favorite friend when you were a child? One person sits on this end, the other person sits on this end, and go like this. Oh, what fun. Seesaw, seesaw, negative, positive, negative, positive. What a play in the brain that goes on. Now, if the positive emotional brain circuits start gaining by practicing tangled hierarchical love with my love partners in my life, and they don't all have to be romantic love, I can simultaneously have love for parents, love for child, love for friends, love for teachers, love for students, love in so many ways. Love is such a many-splendored thing, right? And I have these brain circuits in ACC balancing the negativity in the amygdala. But now what happens? Seesaw battle stops a bit, and the brain becomes more harmonious. How does it show? It shows by shifting. Remember Freud? Let's bring in Freud a little bit. So Freud said all our neurosis comes from the unconscious, which is true in many ways. And so these negative emotions, which is of course built-in unconscious, built-in through instinctual aspects of evolution, this is the strongest, stubbornest part of our negative emotional story. The negative part of the brain, which is 5 times more dominant over the positive part. So there's a lot of unconscious action. This is what I'm trying to say. When you dominate, this domination produces a lot of neurosis in you, lot of neurosis in your partner, because you're doing this all unconsciously. It's just such a shame when we can be conscious about loving. But we aren't. The mechanism has to be played with. Mechanism has to be exercised. And we don't do this in this culture, in this materialist culture. In spiritual culture, yes, we will, we do. Here, we do. Patrick calls everyone a spiritual scientist. Here is a scope of being a spiritual scientist. Be a spiritual scientist. What does that mean? That means experiment with bringing tangled hierarchical love in your relationship with everybody in this ashram or everybody that you meet in your private life. That's a spiritual scientist. Then what happens? What happens is that the unconscious shifts into the conscious. So we have 2 hemispheres. One hemisphere is called the right hemisphere, the other is called the left, you know all that. And left is conscious, the right is unconscious in us. And indeed, as we do this, as we learn to love in this new way, unconscious brain activities shift more and more to conscious brain activities. This is amazing. Brain scientists are simply amazed that it proves that people are happier. They're more consciously engaging with their partners, their work, their affairs. How beautiful is that? And this is the way we are completely capable of living. We can live all three. Sarvang Khalidang Brahman, Aham Brahmasmi, I am that, and then finally, Tad Tvam Asi. You are that too, my love. You are that too. Thank you so much.
Let's all give our love and gratitude to Dr. Amit Goswami. Wow. I love when we get to learn about physics, integrating it with consciousness and love. Thank you.
Oh, perfect.
Will you all come here in loving kindness? Everybody say loudly, Sarvam Kalvidam Brahma, Aham Brahmasmi, Tattvamasi, I am Atma Brahma. Again, Sarvam Kalvidam Brahma, Aham Brahmasmi, Tattvamasi, I am Atma Brahma, Prajnanam Brahma. These are all the great statements from great spiritual scientists, and we are very happy to see those statements from a great quantum scientist's point of view, and today it's also a neuroscientist's point of view. That was something new for me, Swamiji. I never thought that neuroscience has developed so much. Okay, so this is what is spiritual science about, and we are all spiritual scientists. Students of spiritual scientists soon become masters of spiritual science. And this is a great festival of global spiritual scientists. Festival, this is a festival. This is not a congress, this is a festival where we rejoice and we celebrate because we are all oneness. We are oneness incarnate. We have loving kindness towards every being. And thank you very much, sir. You are a great pride of the whole country of India. India is a great country, and you are a Kohinoor of this great country. And today, we are blessed that this Kohinoor has come to Bangalore in this pyramid. He must have been a great Upanishadic sage, undoubtedly, in those days. These days, he has reincarnated himself as a quantum scientist and has explained to us everything. See how much effort they make to make us understand. That is loving compassion. Please. Hey.
Thank you so much. Love you, Patricia.
Hip hip hooray. Dr. Amit Goswami. Hip hip hooray. Dr. Amit Goswami. Pride of India. The greatest spiritual scientist. Combining East and West. Ancient and modern. Please touch his hands. Friends. Each one put one candle. Swami.